So class, we just finished covering the oral cavity. Let's move on to the pharynx. And when people talk about our pharynx, they typically refer to, they don't say the pharynx. Almost no common people say the pharynx. They'll say the back of my throat. And if somebody says the back of my throat, usually they mean that the muscular funnel that connects the oral cavity to the esophagus. So that pharynx in the back of their mouth. And this pharynx is the interface between digestive tracts and respiratory tracts, where we have some regions of it, like the nasopharynx, that's going to be typically just respiratory, and then some other regions that are double duty, both respiratory and digestive. Our pharynx is going to have a longitudinal layer that's very deep, made of skeletal muscle, and this layer of skeletal muscle helps to push things through the pharynx, whereas it has a superficial layer of circular skeletal muscles that are going to be our constrictors. And these constrictors are also going to aid with forcing food downward. When we're not busy swallowing, that inferior constrictor is known as the upper esophageal sphincter, keeps the esophagus pinched off so we don't have air going down into the esophagus. The constriction of the sphincters disappears at the time of the death when all of our muscles relax, or most of our muscles relax. So this sphincter is not a physiological sphincter. It's not a specific anatomical structure that we can find in our bodies. As we look at the esophagus as a whole, after our pharynx, our esophagus is just a tube. Just think of it as a simple tube, 25 to 30 centimeters long. It goes from the pharynx all the way to the stomach at the cardiac orifice, where the esophagus drains into the stomach. And our esophagus is going to be lined with a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Non-keratinized means that by the time we get the food down into our esophagus, it should already be pre-chewed and moistened and turned into a bolus. Our esophagus is not made to handle high friction or abrasion. At the bottom of our esophagus, we have the lower esophageal sphincter, and that lower esophageal sphincter is going to take a little bit of time to open. We can have food build up on that lower esophageal sphincter, and if somebody's a really fast eater, they probably have food build up on that thing frequently, and then they start having hiccups to dislodge the food and get it down into their stomach. When that lower esophageal sphincter relaxes, it allows food to get down into the stomach. But most of the time, the lower esophageal sphincter is going to be pinched off so that the stomach contents aren't regurgitated or vomited upward. It also helps to protect the esophageal mucosa from the stomach acids that could erode away at the esophagus. When somebody is experiencing heartburn, they are experiencing stomach acid making it up into the esophagus and dissolving some of the mucosal membrane of their esophagus. If this happens frequently, they may have something known as acid reflux disease, which is going to contribute to a breakdown of that lower esophageal sphincter. So as we look at this process of swallowing, getting food from the oral cavity to the pharynx and down into the esophagus, we can refer to swallowing technically as deglutition. And deglutition involves quite a few muscles contracting in a sequential fashion. Phase 1 of deglutition is known as the oral phase, and that occurs within the oral cavity or buccal cavity, and it's going to involve us using our tongue to push the bolus of food back towards the laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx is going to be down here. It's that lower portion of the pharynx. As the food moves towards the laryngopharynx, it is going to get caught by the epiglottis and fold that epiglottis downward to help block access to the larynx. And the uvula is folded upward to help keep that food from getting into the nasal cavity. And that only way left for the food to go is down into the esophagus. And then, so we have step 3, the esophageal phase. During the esophageal phase, we are going to have peristalsis, segmental pinching off the esophagus, and then that esophagus will push the food down towards the stomach. And when it gets to the stomach, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes or dilates and allows the bolus entry into our stomach. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.